Las Vegas, August 1972. The neon outside the Hilton pulsed against desert midnight as Elvis Presley, the hotel's star attraction, returned after a sold-out show. But at the private elevator doors, a uniformed guard held up a hand. In front of stunned guests, the king of rock was told he couldn't ride. What happened next became legendary. The Las Vegas Hilton was still vibrating with sound that August night in 1972. Inside the main showroom, 2,000 fans had just witnessed another marathon set, nearly 2 hours of sweat, sequins, and songs that blurred rock and gospel into something only Elvis Presley could deliver. The applause had faded, but the echo still clung to the walls of the casino lobby, carried along with the scent of cigarette smoke and spilled cocktails. Neon from the towering Hilton sign outside threw restless pinks and yellows across the glass. Doors. Elvis stepped through a side corridor, still in his white rhinestone jumpsuit, cape draped over his shoulders, hair damp from the stage lights. He had sung Suspicious Minds 3 times in a row because the crowd would not let him leave. His cheeks were flushed, a scarf tucked into his collar. Around him moved a small entourage, Joe Esposito, his road manager, a couple of bodyguards, and a casino host carrying a tray of drinks no one touched. The lobby was alive. Tourists in sequined gowns and bow ties spilled out of the showroom, chattering in disbelief that they had just seen the king up close. Some clutched folded programs, others tried to edge closer for a glimpse as Elvis moved toward the bank of elevators reserved for performers. A few whispered to one another, "He's even taller than on stage." A woman near the slot machines gasped, hand flying to her mouth. For Elvis, the Hilton was a second home. He had broken attendance records there since opening his residency in 1969. Staff knew him by first name. The elevator ride to his top-floor suite was normally uneventful, the one quiet moment between stage and solitude. He was tired, craving water and silence. Yet tonight carried an unusual charge, as if the crowd itself was leaning in for one more encore as he approached the brass-framed elevator. Its mirrored doors slid open with a mechanical sigh. The entourage slowed, expecting the usual nod from security. But before Elvis could step inside, a figure in a crisp uniform moved forward. A young guard, his first week on the job, extended an arm across the threshold. His name, stitched neatly on the pocket, read Harris. The casino chatter thinned. Chips clinked in the distance, but near the elevator the sound flattened into uneasy quiet. Elvis halted, puzzled. The guard's expression was stern, professional. He saw not the most famous performer in the world, but a weary man in a bejeweled suit. To Harris, this looked like a costumed guest trying to sneak into a private lift. The lobby guests stiffened. Some grinned, expecting a prank. Others looked from Elvis to the guard, waiting for recognition to dawn. Joe Esposito leaned forward to intervene, but Elvis raised a hand, signaling him back. It was a moment that would stretch thin as wire. A legendary performer, in the hotel where his name drew millions, was being stopped in full view of his fans. The neon outside blinked against the glass. A woman dropped her cocktail straw onto the carpet. "Have you ever been recognized everywhere?" And suddenly, not at all. Elvis shifted his weight, his cape brushing the floor. The mirrored elevator doors reflected his own uncertainty back at him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the guard's hand held firm. And then, just as the crowd leaned forward to see what the king would do, the guard said words that froze the entire lobby in place. "Sorry, sir." This elevator is for guests only. The Hilton lobby went dead silent. The words hung in the air like an echo no one wanted to claim. This elevator is for guests only. For a moment, it seemed impossible that the guard had spoken them. The King of Rock stood inches away, yet this young man, uniform pressed and posture rigid, looked him squarely in the eye without recognition. Elvis blinked, stunned not by malice but by sheer disbelief. The Hilton had been his fortress. He was used to being ushered past velvet ropes, hotel managers scrambling to please, fans crying out his name. But here, in the lobby where his posters glowed in glass frames, a stranger had mistaken him for an imposter. Officer Daniel Harris was barely in his 20s, recruited just a week before. He had been briefed on procedure, not on faces. To him, Elvis Presley was a name whispered over radios, a figure glimpsed on posters. Seeing him in person, sweaty, cape-wrapped, taller than expected, didn't compute. He saw only a man in flashy clothes trying to slip into private space. His training was clear. Guard the elevator. No exceptions. A ripple of tension passed through the crowd. Guests who had recognized Elvis exchanged baffled looks. One woman clutched her autographed scarf tighter, whispering to her husband, "Does he really not know?" Laughter bubbled nervously from a group of college kids near the slots, but it died quickly. This was no prank. This was happening. The Hilton's air conditioning hummed, yet sweat trickled down the guard's temple. He was following orders, but suddenly the weight of dozens of eyes bore into him. Joe Esposito took a step forward, ready to flash credentials, but Elvis held him back with the slightest tilt of his head. He wanted to see where this would go. The lobby had shifted into theater. Every shuffle of shoes, every intake of breath seemed amplified. Would Elvis assert himself, demand recognition? Or would the young guard double down? In front of the casino's neon glow, both reputations teetered on the edge. The world's most famous entertainer, and a rookie clinging to procedure. Elvis adjusted his cape, the rhinestones catching the lobby lights. His silence pressed heavier than any shout. Have you ever been in a moment where a single word could tilt everything? Dignity, authority, even history itself. Harris cleared his throat, mistaking silence for challenge. "Sir, this elevator is restricted. You'll need to step back." His voice was steady, but his eyes darted briefly toward the murmuring crowd. Someone from the back shouted, "That's Elvis Presley." Another chimed in, "Let him through." The calls grew louder, but Harris held his ground. He wasn't there to serve the crowd. He was there to enforce the rules. The elevator doors began to slide shut, and Elvis made no move to stop them. The tension peaked. Guests leaned forward, as if the very outcome of the night balanced on whether the king would push past or turn away. Elvis could have lashed out, embarrassed by the denial, his pride bruised before fans. He could have ordered the man fired with a single word, but instead he paused. The lobby was no longer a place of leisure. It had become a stage. The slot machines still whirred, but no one listened. Dozens of guests fixed their eyes on the standoff by the brass-framed elevator. Some whispered, others muttered openly, the disbelief spreading like a wave. "That's him, isn't it?" One woman in a glittering gown asked aloud, pointing toward Elvis. She had been in the front row an hour earlier, close enough to see the sweat bead on his temple as he sang Polk Salad Annie. "It has to be," her companion replied, shaking his head. "Who else wears that suit?" Yet the uniformed guard stood steady, his palm still outstretched. Officer Harris could feel the pressure mounting. His training told him to keep order, to prevent unauthorized entry. But each second of refusal deepened the crowd's confusion, and their whispers sharpened into protest. "Elvis, we love you," a young fan cried from near the casino cage, clutching a folded program. Others echoed, "Let him in." The tension was no longer just between one man and a guard. It was between a legend and the institution meant to serve him. Elvis shifted slightly, studying Harris with eyes that betrayed no anger, only quiet calculation. He knew all too well the dangerous edge between pride and restraint. He had once been booed on southern stages before fame embraced him, had felt what it meant to be dismissed. That memory flickered now in the ornate lobby. What is respect? Is it something you demand in a moment of confrontation, or something you cultivate by the way you respond? Joe Esposito glanced nervously at the crowd, ready to step in. But Elvis lifted a single finger, silencing his manager before he could speak. The king wasn't ready to end this scene. He let the air stretch thinner, testing how far it could bend before it snapped. Harris, meanwhile, felt the weight of history without realizing it. The crowd's murmurs tightened into chants. One guest shouted, "It's really him." A man in a blue blazer shook his head, muttering, "What kind of hotel stops its own headliner?" Every detail of the Hilton seemed amplified. The spinning roulette wheel, the clink of ice in cocktail glasses, the faint notes of a lounge band warming up in another room. All of it underscored the surreal silence and anticipation at the elevator. The longer the pause, the higher the stakes. Elvis's reputation wasn't in danger of being forgotten, but the dignity of the moment was. If he erupted, the story would become scandal. If he yielded, the memory would be humiliation. And for the young guard, every second threatened his credibility and his career. The mirrored elevator doors began to close again, their polished surface reflecting the tense tableau back at the crowd. Elvis stood unmoving, cape shimmering under the casino lights, a figure both regal and oddly vulnerable. The crowd leaned in, hearts racing. They weren't just watching an entertainer now. They were witnessing a test of character unfold in real time. And in that instant, everyone knew the choice Elvis made next would flip the entire room. The mirrored doors hesitated, then slid open once more with a faint metallic sigh. All eyes fixed on Elvis. The weight of silence pressed heavy, as if the Hilton itself had stopped breathing. Fans braced for a confrontation, a burst of anger, a demand, a rebuke befitting a man of his stature. Instead, Elvis smiled. It wasn't a wide grin, but a measured, almost playful curve of the lips. His eyes softened, and he took one deliberate step toward the guard. His voice came low, steady, and unmistakable. "Son," he said, pausing just long enough for the crowd to hang on the word, "I work here." The words cracked the tension like glass. Gasps scattered through the lobby, followed by an explosion of laughter and cheers. It was the kind of line only Elvis could deliver. Brief, humble, laced with humor that dissolved humiliation into connection. The young guard's face went pale. Recognition swept over him at last, the realization landing like a weight. He stumbled back a step, mouth opening but no words escaping. His authority, so rigid a moment before, now crumbled under the heat of understanding. Elvis reached into his pocket, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and dabbed the sweat from his brow. Then, in a gesture that sealed the moment, he turned to a small child pressed against her mother's leg. With a flourish, he bent down, signed the handkerchief, and placed it gently in her hands. The crowd roared. Applause shook the chandeliers. The tension that had held the room hostage evaporated in an instant, replaced by joy that swept across strangers like wildfire. Have you ever seen a single sentence change the direction of an entire room? Harris lowered his hand, stunned, as Elvis patted him lightly on the shoulder. There was no anger, no trace of insult, only grace. The king could have humiliated him. Instead, he turned the denial into a stage, and the guard into an unwitting character in the night's performance. The cheers rose higher. Someone shouted, "That's why we love you, Elvis." Another voice carried above the crowd, "Only he could do that." The casino floor, moments earlier tight with tension, now felt like a revival meeting. But Elvis wasn't finished. He sensed the electricity still crackling in the air. He had one more move to make, a move that would etch this night forever into memory. The lobby thundered with applause, echoing louder than the casino floor had heard all evening. For a few moments, it felt as though the encore had spilled straight out of the showroom and into the heart of the hotel. Yet Elvis, calm amid the chaos, didn't bask in it for himself. His eyes returned to the trembling guard. Officer Harris still looked stricken, his hand frozen midway between salute and retreat. He had denied entry to the most famous man in Las Vegas, maybe the world, and now hundreds of witnesses were watching him unravel. Elvis understood that humiliation could sting deeper than any reprimand. He moved closer, placing a firm but gentle arm around Harris's shoulders. "This man's just doing his job," Elvis declared, his voice ringing across the marble lobby. The words landed with force, silencing the laughter for a moment. Then the cheers rose again, this time not only for Elvis, but for the guard himself. The crowd clapped louder, shifting their energy from mockery to solidarity. It was a reversal only Elvis could engineer. In that instant, Harris transformed from obstacle to unlikely partner in the night's legend. The rookie's pale face flushed red, but he managed the faintest smile as applause washed over him. A little girl tugged at her mother's dress, holding up a program with trembling hands. Elvis leaned down, signed his name in bold strokes, and handed it back with a wink. Another fan, a college student in a paisley shirt, passed forward a cocktail napkin. Elvis scribbled his initials and tossed it back like a magician, sending sparks into the air. The crowd was no longer divided between witness and participant. They had become part of the story, voices cheering, hands clapping, artifacts exchanged. What began as a denial had turned into communion. Have you ever seen embarrassment dissolve into triumph simply because someone chose compassion over pride? The elevator bell chimed softly, its doors yawning open once again. This time, Elvis gestured for Harris to step inside first. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, the king sharing his royal assent with the guard who had barred the way. Together they moved into the lift, the crowd pressing closer, craning for one last glimpse. "Good night, folks," Elvis said warmly, raising his hand in farewell. The words fell like benediction, greeted with another burst of cheers. As the doors began to close, applause rumbled through the marble hall, spilling down corridors and into the casino floor like a second standing ovation. When the elevator finally carried them upward, the lobby buzzed with disbelief. Strangers turned to one another, clutching signed napkins and programs, repeating the line they had just heard, "Son, I work here." They knew already they had witnessed something they would never forget. But what happened in that lobby wouldn't remain only with them. The story was already beginning to take on a life of its own. By the next morning, The story had already begun to spread. Word traveled faster than the clatter of dice across the Hilton casino tables. Guests who had witnessed the scene told it over breakfast in the hotel cafe. Voices lowered but animated, retelling the moment when Elvis turned humiliation into grace. By afternoon, it leaked into fan gossip columns, tucked between concert reviews and photographs of his rhinestone jumpsuit. Local papers eventually ran small blurbs under sections titled Vegas Oddities. One headline read, "Star stopped in own lobby." The articles gave little detail, but for those who had been there, the memory was sharper than print. Fans compared notes, swapping signed napkins and programs as tangible proof. One woman framed the silk handkerchief her daughter had been given, passing it down years later as a family heirloom. Inside the Hilton, staff retold the moment endlessly. Bartenders, dealers, and waitresses repeated it with pride. How Elvis had defended one of their own instead of belittling him. A valet who wasn't even on shift swore he had heard it firsthand, the tale growing with each retelling. Over time, the line, "Son, I work here," became legend, quoted by employees long after Elvis left the stage. For Officer Daniel Harris, the night changed everything. At first, he wanted to disappear, ashamed of the mistake. But Elvis's arm round his shoulders had redefined the narrative. Instead of being remembered as the man who insulted a star, he became part of the law, the rookie who stood tall, and the king who turned it into a joke with kindness. Years later, Harris would still tell colleagues, "He saved me that night. He made me part of the story." Bootleg memorabilia surfaced, a cocktail napkin with bold initials, programs folded in half with fresh ink, photographs snapped hastily by guests who had carried cameras into the lobby. For collectors, these objects became proof of something rarer than a stage performance, a candid glimpse of Elvis's humanity as decades passed. The Hilton itself enshrined its connection to Elvis. In 1997, a bronze plaque was installed in the lobby, commemorating his record-setting run of shows. Fans would gather there, some whispering not about the sold-out concerts, but about the night a security guard told him no. The story lived not in ticket sales or set lists, but in a fleeting moment of humility that resonated far longer. Why is it that small moments, brief, fragile, unplanned, so often outlive the headlines? The legend of the elevator incident became part of Elvis's greater myth, not just a superstar commanding stages, but a man capable of diffusing tension with humor and lifting up those around him. It was a parable that rippled outward, shaping how people remembered his character. And as with all legends, it carried a moral weighting to be told. Looking back, the scene at the Hilton lobby could have ended very differently. A lesser man might have erupted, demanding the rookie be punished, tarnishing the night with anger. But Elvis chose another path, a path that turned embarrassment into theater, and a confrontation into connection. The denial at the elevator became more than an anecdote. It revealed something essential about the man beneath the rhinestones. Even in the face of public slight, he carried himself with humility. He knew that the true measure of power wasn't in the ability to humiliate, but in the choice to protect another's dignity. Fans remembered his voice saying, "Son, I work here," not as a line of sarcasm, but as a declaration of grace. By turning the moment inside out, he reminded everyone that greatness isn't secured by applause alone. It's proven in how one treats the overlooked, the nervous, the ordinary worker simply doing his job. Isn't it striking that the most unforgettable chapters of our lives often come not from planned triumphs, but from how we respond when things go wrong. In that lobby, Elvis demonstrated that kindness has its own spotlight, brighter, perhaps, than the one that had just bathed him on stage. The guests who witnessed it left with more than signed programs or napkins. They carried a lesson, one that outlived the neon glow and the casino noise, that legends endure not just for their music, but for the humanity behind it. And so, decades later, people still tell the story. They don't recall the exact set list of that night, or how many scarves he tossed into the crowd, but they whisper about the moment he was denied his own elevator, and how his reply became legendary. Moments like this remind us that true legends shine brightest through humility. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters. And tell us in the comments, what small act of grace have you witnessed that changed everything?